Good afternoon, friends. My name is Ani Agnihotri. I'm co-founder of USA India Business Summit. It is my pleasure to host this session with Georgia Tech Cyber, titled as Reflections on the US Higher Education System and International Students Enrollment. UIBS and Georgia Tech Cyber have been partnering for the last 12 years. We are very pleased to bring this special edition of the program with C-level executives from higher education. With this, I would like to introduce my partner, Dr. John McIntyre from Georgia Tech Cyber. John.
Thank you, Annie, and great to be collaborating to really be of service to the community. We're very pleased today to have three distinguished individuals with a great deal of experience in the field of international higher education. I am going to be introducing them, but I want to say just a few words to remind our audience that according to the latest data, education ranks 6th among service exports for the United States, that the US hosted over 1 million students in 2019 before the crisis and reported some $45 billion in education export. I won't say more. I will add that 340,000 US students go overseas. And in order to look at the two flows, we have three very competent persons, and I will introduce them in order very briefly. I know the audience have not had the benefit of looking at their bio sketches, so forgive me for dwelling on each bio a little longer than perhaps you would expect. The first is our friend, Dr. Sandra Jordan. She is the 4th Chancellor of the University of South Carolina at Aiken. She started in that function in July 2012. She serves as Chief Exec Officer and Principal Spokesperson for the university. And she has a tremendous amount of experience, over 30 years of experience, holding positions, cabinet level positions at universities, including AVP, Vice President, Provost, et cetera. She is running a high-performing regional comprehensive university offering baccalaureate and master's degree programs. She holds a PhD and an MA in the history of art from the University of Georgia, my alma mater, Sandra. I wonder if we were there at the same time. And she also received the management development program at Harvard University Institute of Higher Education. Many other credentials, 21st Century Leadership Institute, she has a very impressive and solid network of community partnerships, which she has worked long and hard to develop, aligned with university programs of her university with regional workforce needs. And it's really wonderful to see a university positioning itself in response to the needs of a large economic area and community. She's in fact very strongly committed to that community. During her career, and this is really important for the event today, she has worked extensively to expand international educational partnerships, negotiating agreements, building alliances with universities in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Our second participant is Melissa Torres, whom I have known for a while, but I hadn't seen in a long time. So Melissa is currently the Forum on Education Abroad President and CEO, and she has 2 decades at least of experience in higher education and program development. Just a few words about the Forum on Education Abroad. The website, forumea.org, forumea.org. Forum EA has a membership of 800 institutional members, US colleges and universities, among others, and it provides not only training, but also resources for professionals in international education. So it's an important private, not-for-profit organization. She previously served as VP for academic programs at IES Abroad. Most of us know what IES Abroad is, who are in the field of higher education and international students. She supervised 36 international study abroad centers in the course of that experience in Asia, Europe, and Latin America. She has worked closely with Brown University, UNC Chapel Hill, the Ohio State University. She worked as a change management consultant for Accenture, as VP for institutional relations at Global Vision International. In short, really making a long story short, she is a person of experience, deep experience. And today we are happy to have her join us because she's going to be looking at the reverse flow We tend to talk a lot about what foreign students, international students bring to US campuses, how they contribute to the life, and how we make a contribution to them in return. But Melissa also brings forward the reverse of that coin, if I may call it that, at least the other part of the flow. She's a graduate of Stonehill College and has an advanced degree from the Ohio State University. She's fluent in Spanish and French, Gaelic. I tried my hand at that, not easy. Portuguese. Last but not least, my old friend, whom I have known, Amy, dare I say 30 years, maybe not, maybe a little less. Amy Bass-Henry, she's the Executive Director of International Education. Now, let me tell you that that office is one of the largest on campus and one of the largest in the United States. It has over 30 professionals working there, handling all the flows, international flows of Georgia Tech, a research university, an engineering-based research university. So it's quite substantial. We're happy to have her, and she could spare the time because I think she faces a crisis a minute. I may be wrong on that, but maybe it's an hour. And so that office leads student-centered internationalization, serves education abroad students, international scholars, of which we have a lot, and provides global at home and on campus internationalization opportunity. She's a graduate of the well-known College of William and Mary, and she has an advanced degree from Georgia Tech in International Affairs, from the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs. She's involved in many, many initiatives on campus, including the Inclusive Leader Culture Champion, and she's a trainer for the Management Development Program of NAFSA. I won't say more, she has a wealth of experience. So we have, in essence here, three fantastic individuals who can sort of, in a crossfire sort of way, provide insights and lead us in this discussion as we begin a new era, perhaps one in which we will see international education after the COVID crisis pick up a momentum again. So without further ado, may I please turn it over to you, Sandra, and I hope I wasn't too long and took too much time.
Thank you so much, John. I appreciate it. And thank you everyone who's joining us today. Of course, we're all here because we're all very interested in the future of student exchange and multi-directional study abroad programs. And especially after the global pandemic, wondering what this is going to look like in the future. I think a lot of our conversation today will be about the immediate future and the changes we might see on the horizon. I've been asked to sort of set the stage for our broader discussion today with an overview of where we are. And so my comments will be followed by those of our individuals participating in this seminar. And they are all deeply involved in multi-directional student study abroad programs. So let me get started. If we learned anything during this pandemic, it's how interconnected our world is. We had ample examples during the COVID crisis to see how global challenges require global cooperation and global solutions. The importance of exchange and student abroad programs has, I think, if anything, been heightened during this crisis that has affected every nation on our globe. Universities and our business and industry partners play a vital role in facilitating meaningful and safe educational exchange programs in all directions, helping more American students learn firsthand about other people and other cultures, and helping more of our international students coming to the United States experience for themselves our country. I imagine each of us is committed to leveraging international education as a way to expand our students' horizons. But we're also aware that these programs are a form of public diplomacy, and they plant seeds of understanding, trust, and I think even peace. And all of that is important to each of us who participates in international programming. Additionally, internationalization is a response to several global pressures, including the ever-increasing need for a global competitive workforce that students need to be able to contribute, of course, the knowledge that they gain in their major, but they also have to be able to comprehend and analyze and evaluate the meaning of their knowledge within their field in a larger context globally. So I think students that have the ability to look at issues from a global perspective are students that are in great demand. So in order to produce students who are globally minded and critical thinkers, higher education institutions are seeking many, many different ways in which to achieve these results. And it goes from everything from internationalizing their own curriculum on their campus to providing research opportunities abroad, internship opportunities abroad, study abroad in a way that is more traditional, and cross-border programs that exist around the United States in many, many forms. In addition to these kinds of learning outcomes, I think there's been a lot published on the fact that globalized exchange programs act like little economic engines as well. They fuel the economies of the local institutions and their budgets. And in the United States, for many of us, those budgets are highly strained as public institutions being funded in the past by their state legislatures, as those legislatures step away from the traditional role of funding public higher ed. It not only fuels the institutions and their budgets, but the local economies and our communities where our universities are thriving. And in a larger context, even the nations that receive the largest number of students have found that international students coming to study in their countries are, again, fueling the economy. And let me give you an example of that. NASFA's latest analysis finds that international students studying at the United States colleges and universities contributed more than $38 billion, and they supported 415,900 new jobs in the United States economy. So they're contributing to the economy in very real ways. Approximately 40% of international students in the United States are studying STEM fields. And if they are remaining in the US, they're actually providing great insight and ideas to the technology industries as they are growing across the nation. Where additionally, half of the startup companies in the United States are started by individuals who have immigrated to the United States. So let me put this in some other terms for other countries. In 2017, over 685,000 international students went to study in Australia, which was a 15% increase in the number of international students in Australia just the year before. By 2018, Australian colleges and universities, international students made up almost 20% of the student population, 20%. However, during the global pandemic, early reports out of Australia expressed real fears that the number of students might be cut in half, so down to 10% of the population. Australian universities suffered significant revenue and job losses due to the loss of international students. So this highlights the fact that international education provides an economic engine for the institutions, for their regions, and for their nations. A Mitchell Institute report has estimated that the sector of higher ed may lose up to $19 billion in the next 3 years, while modeling that for the country of Australia. And the Universities Australia Journal shows that about 20,000 jobs are at risk in 2021 due to the fact that they simply dropped off in international enrollment. We can see this occurring in other countries where there are large numbers of students traveling into the countries for international education. So in France, since 2017, international students contributed upwards of $4.65 billion, euros, into the economy every year for several years in a row. Along with the spending associated with international students studying in France, the country did an estimate of the beyond the tuition and their expenditures and travel and so forth, the fact that families were coming to see their children in France while they were studying there, which added another $5 million per year of families visiting. Georgia Tech has a wonderful program in Lorraine, France that my son studied at, and I can tell you his father and I went over there every year and contributed to the French economy while he was there working on his doctorate. The PIE reported a decline in the number of international students this year in France, down about 25%. And despite the challenging context, France has recently reasserted itself in a way that the United States has not as a destination of choice, because they are very concerned about the economic impact of a loss of international students. And you know, students are starting to react to that messaging, particularly those from sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, according to Campus French statement. The other country we could look at for this example is the United Kingdom. International students added about 13.8 pounds, a billion pounds gross value to the United Kingdom GDP. On top of the cost of attending school abroad, international students spent a lot of money traveling. So adding to the host country's transportation revenues, but also, of course, on food and clothing and entertainment while they were studying abroad. And Great Britain has done a great job of tracking that, coming up with 750 million in transportation industry increases and 690 million in the retail industry, brought in by students studying from other countries in Great Britain. We're all aware that the travel restrictions and other regulations have impacted travel abroad programs in 2020 and in 2021. Not surprisingly, COVID reduced international student enrollments in the United States by at least 16% by the fall of 2020. And I think this number would have been larger if a significant number of students already studying in the United States had not remained in the US throughout the pandemic. If you're looking at only new students and losses from students that were anticipated coming to the United States during the COVID pandemic, the loss is closer to 43% of the students who did not come to the United States. In contrast, incoming international students enrolling in the United States for 5 years prior to COVID-19 was above 1 million students, and it was quite stable. So for 5 years, over 1 million students every year in the United States. So what's facing us right now is the question, will we recover, and how long would it take? I think there'll be a return to the kind of exporting of the United States students to other countries and importing international students to the US. But in my opinion, we're looking at some time in order to recover. We don't quite know the full impact of the pandemic will have on us next year, what kind of restrictions will be reintroduced as we see spikes taking place in populations that failed to either get the virus inoculation or who are resistant to inoculations. We're all aware that there have been visa issues, travel restrictions, safety concerns, and conditions for international mobility have not been favorable in 2020 and 2021. But in addition to the pandemic and the logistical issues, it's also important to recognize that the United States families were concerned about their finances. Many of them participated in furloughs from their companies, layoffs, working slowdowns, unemployment increases. And so many families were either unable or unwilling to raise those funds to support their child who wanted to travel abroad. Now, the study that was published by WES surveyed 79% of prospective students and asked them if they were going to continue to come into higher ed internationally. And 43% that believed that they couldn't afford to after the pandemic. That's a pretty significant number for us to think about and has implications for how we might scholarship or find other kinds of support from our corporate partners to help support these students. As we look at relevant comparisons, we know that during the Great Recession, a previous very significant economic turndown for the United States, student mobility continued to grow. But I don't think that's going to be the case after the pandemic. And so it's going to be interesting to watch that in other countries so we can predict how it will be in the United States. So we know in 2010, when India, the second largest sender of international students, experienced an economic crisis, it dramatically impacted outgoing students from India. So I think we have to keep in mind the severe economic outlook, and it may take us numerous years to recover from the pandemic losses. And now you have all these experts here who are going to share their thoughts. And so I think Melissa Torres is going to come up next, our colleague, to talk about this from her perspective.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for this tour d'horizon. Melissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, John. As you mentioned earlier, John, I am the president and CEO of the Forum on Education Abroad. The forum is recognized by the U.S. Department of Justice and the Federal Trade Commission as being the standards development organization for the field of education abroad at the post-secondary level. And in plain English, what that means is that we have the responsibility to develop and disseminate standards, whether that covers health and safety, learning objectives, marketing, partnerships, ethical issues related to education abroad. And so we provide a great number of resources to the field and to the public at large. And I'd like to begin by sharing some information from a new white paper recently published by the International Coalition for International Education and Exchange, titled Advancing Global Stability and U.S. National Security Through Peaceful Exchange. The paper highlights the importance of increasing access to and diversity in international education. And the authors note that for nearly 100 years, American leadership, regardless of political affiliation, has recognized the vital importance of people-to-people exchange programs in bolstering our nation's economy, strengthening our national security, and improving America's status in the world. In today's interconnected societies, where global challenges really require cooperation on solutions, the United States should not retreat from international engagement, but should rather strengthen our efforts to build positive and mutually supportive connections with our neighbors and allies by facilitating meaningful, safe, educational exchange in all directions, helping more Americans learn firsthand about other people and cultures, and helping more foreign students come to America to experience for themselves the principles upon which our country was built: liberty, democracy, capitalism, and basic human freedoms. America can and should leverage international education and public diplomacy programs to plant seeds of peace, regain the world's trust, and return to our previous role as a respected leader in global affairs. The paper includes specific ways to achieve these objectives through the creation of programs and policies that support ambitious goals for international education, such as doubling the number of international students and exchange visitors who study, work, intern, and train in America by 2025, and doubling the number of high-need Americans who study abroad in that timeframe, so that they too may develop the intercultural skills and competencies to compete in the global economy. Other goals include doubling the number of US students studying science and technology abroad, and increasing resources and opportunities for US students traditionally underrepresented in education abroad, including increasing the number of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, and first-generation college students, as well as the number of LGBTQ students who study abroad. Finally, increased funding to expand virtual and hybrid modalities are also a component of the author's suggestions. When it comes to recruiting international students to US universities, the authors have this to say: it is the duty of leaders in higher education to clearly articulate a welcome for international students coming to the United States and to their individual campuses. Recognizing and communicating that campuses seek international students as part of their learning community is a clear acknowledgement that these students bring great value to the learning environment of a university campus. US higher education leaders should publicly adopt a goal to increase their international enrollment and take part in global recruitment, making visits around the world to share news about their campuses with potential students in their communities. In the same way that the United States has invested in global economic development efforts, universities should amplify and leverage their consortiums in the coming years to send visible messages of welcome and value to international students. The white paper suggests that the US government support these efforts by streamlining visa processes, leading a national campaign to educate American citizens about the benefit of international students, and developing resources to assist communities across the United States to provide an appreciative and hospitable environment for newly arrived international students. Another white paper, recently published by Georgetown University professor Dr. Stephanie Kim, also makes specific policy recommendations on supporting international students coming to the United States. Dr. Kim writes, "It cannot be overstated how comprehensively international students contribute to the higher education sector and the American economy more broadly. As Sandra pointed out just a moment ago, more than 1 million international students were enrolled in US colleges and universities in the 2019-2020 academic year. They contributed $38.7 billion and supported more than 400,000 jobs in the US, making higher education our country's 6th largest service export, larger than our exports in telecommunications, plastics, and meat and poultry. Clearly, it's critical that we look beyond the simple financial contribution of these students to realize that a degree from US colleges enrich students' lives and facilitates a deeper understanding of our democracy, laws, and society. International students unquestionably enrich US classrooms by sharing their own cultures and experiences, providing richer learning opportunities for American students. International students make up only about 5% of total higher education enrollment in the US. At the undergraduate level, that translates to about 3%, and at the graduate level, their proportion increases to 12%. It's not surprising that international student enrollment in the US has dropped significantly in recent years and is at extreme risk right now due to visa restrictions and the inability to process student visas in a timely manner. This problem is compounded by xenophobic rhetoric, anti-Asian attacks, and a constant barrage of mass shootings and gun violence displayed on media coverage everywhere. The perception that America is a dangerous, unwelcoming place in which to study, live, and work has already cost the US 5% of the world's share of international students, even as the number of globally mobile students has exploded. NAFSA, the Association of International Educators, analyzed data from the US Department of Commerce, which indicates that the larger the presence of H-1B visa holders in a metro area, the larger the growth in innovation, measured in patents by both immigrant groups and by US native-born workers. Additionally, it is projected that an increase in H-1B visas could yield 1.3 million new jobs and add $158 billion to the US GDP by 2045. Quite frankly, international students will simply choose to study in countries like Canada, the UK, Australia, and elsewhere if these challenges aren't addressed, with US companies, higher education institutions, and communities being the real losers. Dr. Kim also argues that immediate action is needed in the form of an executive order from President Biden, instructing agencies such as the State Department, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Education, and the Department of Commerce to develop procedures to ensure that every bona fide and qualified international student who wishes to study in the United States in the fall of 2021 can do so. How incoming international students who have been admitted to an American institution are able to study here this fall when COVID-19 infection rates continue to surge in countries like India and Brazil, where our assistance is direly needed to combat the virus and increase access to vaccinations, or when embassies remain closed in a sending country as significant as China, makes me doubt whether Dr. Kim's goal is achievable, even should an executive order occur in time. These two white papers agree that a national strategy is imperative if we are to increase the number of international students on US college campuses. And while there is work to be done at the national level to restore perceptions of the United States as a welcoming destination, Congress also needs to take action to expedite visa services, undertake immigration reform to allow DACA students to more easily pursue college degrees, and to preserve post-graduation work and training opportunities, such as the optional practical training program. At the state and local level, there is also much work to be done to revitalize our image, to combat racism and xenophobia, and to ensure that international students know they are welcome. According to other research done by NASA, while public opinion polls in the US show an overall positive attitude toward international students, they also find a significant gap and a clear understanding of the value and benefits that international students bring, with negative perceptions lingering that international students take college seats away from the US students and that they might pose a security threat to the US, while none of these perceptions are supported by evidence. According to the newly created Higher Education Immigration Portal, first-generation immigrants, many of whom are international students who stayed to live and work in the US after graduation, comprise 22.8% of Georgia's STEM workers, 11.4% of its nurses, and 17.3% of health aides in the state. So the need to plan and act locally is quite pressing. Give me 1 second. I'm sorry, I have an issue with my presentation. In my day-to-day work at the Forum on Education Abroad, I focus primarily on resources that help increase the number of students from US colleges and universities who study or intern outside our country. I believe this work and the work to attract and retain international students to the US are intricately intertwined. While COVID-19 has decimated our field, as most study abroad programs have been shuttered for more than a year, the pandemic has illustrated the importance of collaboration and intercultural understanding to solving complex global issues more clearly than I and my colleagues might ever have been able to do. We are eager for governments to cooperate on vaccine distribution and regulations for cross-border travel. We hope embassies and consulates around the world will soon open and address the backlog of both immigrant and student visas. And we know the pandemic has taught us many valuable lessons that we shouldn't abandon when mobility resumes. Access to technology, for example, is critical to reducing inequities, and we need to be intentional about the use of virtual programming as a complement to, not a substitute for, mobility. And we especially need to ensure that technology isn't used as a second-class substitute for students who can't go abroad. Finally, the arrival of COVID-19 has demonstrated that international education is about much more than just mobility. At its core, international education is about preparing global citizens with the skills to engage with difference and a willingness to examine and adapt their worldviews. To accomplish this, we must stay student-focused, continue to question the existing structures, and experiment with innovative pedagogies and partners so that students leave college prepared for the careers and responsibilities that will give them a better shot at solving the most challenging issues facing our planet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melissa, for a compelling presentation and issuing many challenges to all of us. We next turn to Amy. You're welcome. Amy,
Thank you, Sandra.
is in the trenches day to day, fighting.
Yeah, I am. I mean, they're friendlier trenches than military ones, but nonetheless,
No, I mean,
feel somewhat
sorry for the
trench-like.
analogy.
So I'd like, thank you, Sandra and Melissa. I'd like to add some thoughts around the kind of primary bullet points that hopefully are what brought you here, because they're what was in the advertising for this webinar. And I know that Sandra and Melissa have provided us with some really insightful thoughts and comments and even predictions. I think really when we look at the impact of this pandemic, and I think in particular about international students and making predictions for fall 2021, there's going to be a lot of variability between institutions. And there's actually a lot more uncertainty this year than there was last year. Last year, it became pretty clear pretty early that students weren't coming to the US. And so institutions really had to pivot and had to offer things online for continuing students and even for new students who weren't able to arrive. On our campus in particular, international student enrollments did not decline. Physical arrival into the country to take our classes absolutely declined, but not their enrollments, because we were offering so many of our classes online that we were still able to enroll lots of students. We also had a lot of students who hadn't left the US. So we had most of our continuing students who had stayed. And so who were in the same boat really as all of our domestic students. But there's a lot more uncertainty this year because we all have high hopes, and mine is not the only campus that has announced that fall will go on like 2019, not like 2020. And that means we really need to get our students here. And, you know, with embassies and consulates largely not open and backlog on top of that, we just don't know how many. We know they won't all. This we can know, but we don't know how many or which of our students will actually be able to arrive. We also don't know what everyone's vaccine plans are going to be yet, and what kinds of vaccines are going to be accepted. So institutions have a lot of decision making in a time of even higher uncertainty than we had a year ago. I think that the institutions that really are going to fare the best in terms of student service and student support are going to be those that really leverage their collaborations internally and externally. And, you know, what I mean by this is that we all have to leverage the resources we have on our campuses and with external stakeholders. Got to get whatever information we can. It's always going to be imperfect, and make decisions that are as timely as possible. That's what's going to allow us to provide the best support that we can to our students. You know, in terms of some of the things, Melissa talked a little bit about immigration policy, especially thinking about Dr. Kim's paper and the things that are needed to really help us get to a better place in terms of international student enrollments. And I agree with Melissa and Dr. Kim, that travel restrictions and getting visas are the biggest issue right now. I mean, the advocacy that higher education institutions are doing and need to be doing right now are really around getting embassies and consular posts open, making allowances, like maybe not requiring interviews for some to get visas, because that's the key piece for us to be able to get them here. Institutions have admitted everyone's admission process is running, and admissions are up from international students. Or I shouldn't say admissions, applications are up from international students, according to the Council on Graduate Schools, and a less formal survey of undergraduate admissions offices. So applications are up, but then we need to yield those students and actually get them here. The things that we can do as individuals and institutions is contact our legislators, work with our professional associations, and even with our campus government relations teams to really do some advocacy in this area. You know, this year in particular, last year and this year, so thinking more kind of academic year, the support for international students has taken a center stage on many campuses, as has support for domestic diverse students. There's been so much attention and a great advocacy and grassroots work around civil rights in the US and actually around the world, that there's been some really good intentional work to support students who are different in some way, right? And I think that for international students in particular, when we think about welcoming them back to campus or the ones who have stayed, you know, as we're reopening more things and returning to something closer to normal, there are 3 things that are really critical for us all to do. One is we've got to make sure that we help our international students feel safe. And that does include physical safety. They are fearful, and statistics tell them they should be, as does media in their home countries. So they are fearful for their physical safety. And, you know, we have all lived things in recent months that don't make that surprising to anyone. But it's not just about their physical safety. We also want them to feel safe emotionally and psychologically, and safe as they're pursuing their studies and able to really engage in our communities. So the second thing we have to do is ensure that they feel like valued members of our university community, and that they feel it. And it's not just coming from the international office, but it's coming from across the campus. Doing it requires cross-campus collaborations, including, really importantly, collaborations with people who are doing domestic diversity work. The alliances and synergies that can exist and can really make a campus a better place for everyone, and especially students, are really incredible between international offices and diversity offices. And then the third piece is that we've got to keep providing immigration advice that's as timely as it can be. The last administration and this one don't seem to be super eager to get information out in as timely a way as advisors and designated school officials and others would like. But once it's there, we've got to be agile, and we've got to really make sure that we are providing them with reliable information as quickly as we can. I think just one more thing I'd like to touch on, and then John's gonna ask questions, as we will of course also take questions from everyone participating. I think that we all need to keep in mind as our campuses are transitioning back to in-person, or maybe some of you didn't leave in person. We did. We have been hybrid, but it's been leaning a lot towards virtual and less of the in-person. It's really going to be incumbent on all of us to look at what has been working well during pandemic times and to integrate the lessons of the pandemic in terms of online learning, how engagement can really work better in some cases, some classes, some situations, thinking about our faculty and staff and flexible work arrangements that can lead to higher productivity and higher retention and effectiveness. We have to think through and adapt to really be able to integrate what was good about the old and what's good from the current into a new reality for everyone that is intentionally better than what we had. And we've talked a lot in this webinar so far, and I'm sure we will more, about the really important economic realities and benefits of hosting international students. I think it's also important to remind ourselves of the overall purpose, that we don't have international students because they bring economic benefits. We have international students because we value exchange of ideas and exchange of people, and the role that that plays as powerful cultural diplomacy. And that has the benefits, the economic benefits and innovation and other things that go with it. But at the core, that we focus, kind of step back and make sure that we focus first on our values and the value of international education, and have that drive the work that we do to get things back up and running, and return hopefully better even than before the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy, for sharing your insights and the order of priorities in terms of really opening the gates come August. My first question, if I may, I would like to direct to the whole panel, but particularly to Sandra. The challenge really to make students from overseas feel safe, welcome as members of a learning community, but also the broader community. I know you have experienced that challenge from the point of view of the border between Georgia and South Carolina. What is your experience like to convince local leaders and your community at large that indeed international students are not only an economic benefit, but also a more general benefit in terms of the place of the US in the world at large, but the place of their community? And in terms of promoting the values that seem to be very much on the forefront these days.
Thank you, John, for that question. I think two things. While I talked a little bit about the economic aspects of our international students, one of the reasons is because I have had some success bringing business and industry into the conversations with our governments, our state governments, because they're talking about their need for talent. And we can talk about, as you all know, America is facing a cliff, as they call it. I think it's a ripple in some states, it's a cliff in others, of college-age students graduating from high school. So for someone here in South Carolina who has Boeing talking about the fact that they are constantly looking for talent, if I use that language of international students bring us additional talent and there's this little economic engine that comes with them, that's language they understand and value. We've also had some luck talking about the fact, in South Carolina and in Georgia, where there's sometimes some parochial approach to international students taking spaces that belong to our tax-paying families, to remind them that our states have not contributed a dime in the K through 12 education of these students. And yet a percentage of them may stay in the United States. So it depends on who I'm talking to, John, but if I'm talking to business and industry and I'm talking to members of our state house, our local delegation here in our community who serves in the state house, I find that if I can put this in language about the economic benefits of to our state and our region, or even our county, I have better progress. It's not that they don't believe in the other reasons that we all, I came from the academic side of the house. It was because I wanted to have robust discussions in classes from multiple points of view. It's the diversity piece I loved, but that's not what they're thinking about when they're looking at tax revenues and shortfalls and so forth. So I do think you have to be savvy enough to build your arguments based on what you think your audience needs to hear. And it's not that I'm not telling the truth, it's that I want to speak the language that they respond to.
Yeah, yeah, I am not surprised at all by your answer. I move to Melissa and ask her the same question, but phrase it perhaps in the role of an advocate, particularly at the national level with subcommittees and committees of Congress and agencies, because I think you've been quite involved in that and you made some remarks that addressed it. So question, but in terms of the acceptance and changing the mindset, as it were.
Well, I think part of it begins with the general, I mean, if you're talking to government officials, they're concerned about what their population thinks. What do the citizens of their state or their congressional district think? And by and large, the American public is very united in its pro-international education. Whether that's sending US students abroad or welcoming international students to the US. I think the US public gets it. Reminding congressional leaders, for example, that of the economic impact and the competitiveness benefits to their local communities is certainly one tactic. Another thing, though, just going back to what Sandra said about being from the academic side of the house, I think we need to make sure that our faculty and our frontline administrators are prepared to include these students as 100% valid, welcome members of the university community. And it starts with some of the most simple things like teaching people how to pronounce names correctly. Including different examples in your curriculum. So when you're doing a case study or you're having students read different authors, that you're inclusive of international students and the world perspective. And John, you know this better than I do. There are many faculty who do that already or do it naturally, or they bring their international research into the classroom, but there are many others that don't.
That's right.
And so looking for opportunities to expand their portfolio of tools so that they can reach these students. Because I believe that most educators and most people who work at colleges and universities want every student to feel welcome and valued, but they don't necessarily have the life experience or the professional experience to do that.
The same question, you tied diversity on campus, domestic diversity, to international students feeling welcome, safe and secure and accepted. Could you develop that theme internally to a university and the commitment of the university community?
So I think the idea of international offices and diversity offices and others who are supporting students on a campus working together is a really easy tie to make because it's really all about difference. It's about people's mindsets and how they approach and interact with and work with and even leverage difference. And so while traditionally on US campuses, the offices have been very separate, there have been some campuses where that wasn't the case, where they've worked together very well. And I think there's a lot more of that that's been happening over the last year, which is a wonderful development because a lot of the same concepts, even if what you do in some programs is different, the concepts around perception, around mindset and approach to cultural difference are really very similar. I mean, we have always in our intercultural trainings for students, for example, preparing to go abroad, talk to them about how the skills they were going to learn about navigating difference were skills they would be able to use afterwards, even if they never went abroad again, because they would inevitably encounter difference. And that they could leverage those same tools and concepts to be able to be effective, right? And have effective relationships, which is really where where you can bump into things, but also where you can make a big difference and make big progress in terms of having better relationships and better contributions that you can make.
In my experience, I've found that there is a gap between our graduate students who are often very international, perhaps not internationally minded, but very international in point of fact, and our undergrad students who may be more local oriented. And in my years at Georgia Tech, I've sort of tried to build bridges between the two, but it hasn't proven very easy. Am I overstating that point, Amy, if I may?
I don't think you're overstating it, but I do think it is something that ever needs work because there are ever new groups of students coming. And I think one of the key points that can make it challenging, right, to bring those populations together is, you know, you're trying to interest international students who are many make assumptions about international students that they are internationalized and very interculturally savvy, and they may not be at all. They may have not encountered a lot of difference ever. They may even be from a culture that doesn't talk about difference in the same kind of open ways that is common on US campuses. So I think thinking about both populations and encouraging them to think about the how exciting it can be actually to form friendships and relationships with people who are different from you, whether that difference is of national difference or some other kind of difference is really where we can do a lot of good work and that we will ever have to do work. So it hasn't felt easy to you, probably because it's always needed, but that's because there's always new humans coming through who need to have that exposure, right? It's about how humans develop, right? And how our minds develop and how we grow. And on a college campus, you're getting young adults for the most part, traditional college campuses anyway, I guess. And that's a certain phase of development. And so they always need to have what feels maybe to others like repetition, but need to have the same sorts of content and experiences to help them develop the knowledge and the skills to be effective in working with people, working and interacting with people who are different from them.
I don't want to overdwell on that point, but what I've found on some campuses that have a large number of international students, you get a phenomenon of ghettoization where the Chinese students hang together, even the French students in some cases, and we have a lot of them at Georgia Tech, or the Indian students. How do you break that ghettoization process and ensure that indeed the international student population work and plays side by side with our US students?
Yeah, and maybe not with US, but with people who are different, right?
Yes, yes.
And being from Bombay compared to Chennai is not enough difference. So yes, I hear you, because sometimes our students, they come from a big country, and they're from different cities, and they even group together based on city of origin or city where they studied. So, I mean, you have to have intentional programs and opportunities, and you have to make sure that you're not enrolling them all in the same classes, right? That they're coming and enrolling in classes with everyone else, that you're working with faculty to have team projects where they're going to get some exposure to not always just picking the same people who they're in a team with. You offer dorms that mix them up with others. You offer, I mean, they, and then when you offer events and programs, you have to do some work so that they don't self-segregate even at the event, right? So we'll do things like an international student welcome reception, and we'll have the students from Shanghai here and the students from Chennai here, and right, they self-segregate, and you have to build in activities that are going to have them and force them to interact with others, because it's a natural human tendency that we gravitate towards people who we perceive to be like us. And so when we provide avenues for them to find points of commonality with others, then that opens the door for them to build those kinds of friendships and connections. Maybe their closest friends will always be people from their home country, but that does not mean that they will not have meaningful and important relationships with culturally different others, be they Americans, or be they French students and they're from India, right? I mean, there are many different kind of configurations that are possible.
I'm wondering if
John.
you go ahead, Sandra. I know you have a lot to say on that one.
Well, I had a quick thought. When I was working a lot in China, one of the things that they really quickly recognize is that urban institutions have an additional thing to think through, and that is if you have a large population of a certain part of the globe in your urban community, what we were finding is our Chinese students would kind of glom on to the Chinese community in the urban area. So it's there's an extra layer. I don't have that here in this comprehensive university in South Carolina, but I did have it at another institution that was more urban. So another layer of things to think about to make sure your students are taking advantage of the opportunity to mingle with people who maybe aren't like the folks they grew up with.
John?
If I'd like,
Melissa, I know you want to say a few words before we turn over to the Q&A, and I think Annie is listening in that direction. Go ahead, Melissa.
very quickly, I actually think education abroad or study abroad can be one answer to this conundrum, in that, you know, you're normally talking about smaller groups of students, or if it's an exchange program, maybe it's one student from your institution going somewhere else. And I think that, or even short-term faculty-led programs, it really provides an opportunity to get students out of their normal, everyday kind of on-campus culture and to interact with other students from their own institution and other institutions that they might not otherwise do. So thank you.
Thank you. Annie, are we doing on time? I think we're at 4:32.
Yeah, we're fine. I would like to start some other questions on other wavelength, if it is okay.
So I'm going to stop my moderator's question. I have a lot, but we have really touched on a lot of hot burning topics that deserve our attention, follow-up attention. So let's see what the audience has to say. And Annie, you will be the moderator in that regard.
Right. So, you know, let me kick off questions from a different point of view. Sandra, Melissa, and Amy, thank you for your comments and observations. I'm a foreign student. I was a foreign student 30 years back in US, and I'm now harvesting the benefits of coming from India and getting my education in the US and working. I'm an entrepreneur. I have a couple of small companies. But my question is that 30 years back, you know, people used to aspire to come to US. US was, and it is to quite an extent, the destination, a gold standard of higher education, at least in the higher education world worldwide, and US degrees valued everywhere. And we have iconic technology companies we had 30 years back, we have now, but somewhere in the process we are sliding, and we have started seeing competition which is coming from China, Korea, Japan, India, Canada, and other countries also. Now, I also work with economic development agencies of Georgia and other as a consulting also for companies. Number one thing companies look for when they're trying to move to a city or counties, they're looking for talent. And talent is directly related with what a corporation is planning to do, which is, and higher education produces the higher quality of talents. So what is the role our corporate America is playing or not playing in making noise about the changes which we are seeing? Is because 10, 15 years from now, we will see what we are seeing in the manufacturing. Everybody says, where are the Bell Labs, the Fords, and the manufacturing has gone from US. Okay, this is the time we have to start thinking about higher education may be gone in 20 years from US. That's the question. Sandra?
I'll jump in and take a stab. I think that those companies should be taking a close look at what is lacking. Why are they not finding American employees to fill those jobs? And I suspect that part of it is in the fact that we have not invested in our K through 12 education the way that we need to. And they need to be involved in colleges and universities. And I think that universities can be a challenge for outsiders to find their way into. So if you are an entrepreneur and you want to find talent at a university, or you have a complaint about their end product and what they're doing, it's hard to find your way in to have partners. So maybe there's some responsibility on the university side. And Sandra, I know you can say a lot more about this than I can, but I heard over and over and over when I worked on a campus that people in the community and companies in particular didn't know how to gain entree into the ivory tower, so to speak.
I think you're right, Melissa. I think that we don't offer a very clear front door for entrepreneurs, business, and industry to come in and partner with us. But I do think that higher ed is changing very, very rapidly in America as a industry, if you want to use that phrase. While we wear the same kind of costumes for commencement that we wore in the 12th century, though, my experience in 39 years of being in higher ed is that we're pretty light on our feet, and we tend to change pretty rapidly in response to what's happening around us. A great example, of course, is COVID-19. We had about a week to put together 100% online programming, and it was amazing. We were able to do that and also provide our international students with a sense of comfort that we were here to be with them, that they were going to stay on the campus, we were going to provide the sort of support they needed, and so on. So I think we're pretty good at reacting to the environment around us, contrary to what the pundits talking about higher ed tend to say. But I do think it's moving very rapidly and changing very rapidly. And what we have tried to do here, I think, is a perfect example of where we're all going to have to go. And that's in Georgia Tech's a wonderful example of this. We have to partner with business and industry and with K through 12 in order to provide that pathway that we need, which is why many of us are starting high schools on our campus, or P through 12th grade education on our campuses, because we need that pathway and that example of high performing education, both for our kids and their parents.
Thank you. So I have a question here, which I'm going to read. This is from audience, from Michael Hoffman. Question reads, over the last minutes, there seemed to be an underlying assumption that we should really focus on providing opportunities to students, international and our own, to experience difference. But that might not be motivation that brings international students here. They might mainly be interested in getting technical skills or knowledge from a research one university. So do we really have a right to push them into experiencing difference? John and others can answer. John and Sandra can answer, please.
Well, I think Michael has a point. I mean, at least in statistical term, because engineering, math, computer science, as fields of study for international students coming to the US in FFY 2019 amounted to 40% of all students. And Amy or may correct me on that. So really it adds up to about 40%. The others were really evenly divided. The most after that, the largest category after that was 16% for business and management, which raises another related question that I was going to address to Sandra. What has happened to business schools in terms of the COVID crisis, but also the international students issues we have been raising? But in answer to Michael Hoffman, yes, indeed, they do come to the US to really be exposed to the educational opportunities in STEM and engineering. There's no question about it. The numbers show that. These are not new numbers. They really go back to the immediate post-World War II era. I'm thinking particular, Amy will correct me if I'm wrong, the old Georgia Tech YMCA brought to campus in the late 40s and early 50s German students doing PhDs in engineering at Georgia Tech as part of the reconstruction of Germany. There were traces of that program left until the 1990s. Yes, the STEM engineering aspect is a primary motor or motivator of students coming here.
But we still, John, have, we still as institutions have values, right? And
Yeah.
most US institutions believe that whole person education matters. And so regardless of any student's origin or what they're coming for, the institution also has its own ideas about what kinds of graduates it's trying to produce. And usually that's going to be more than just technical skills, because history has shown, at least in US universities, that that's what's going to make our students most successful and going to be of the most benefit to society.
Right.
No,
Thank you, Amy,
wholeheartedly
for
agree.
jumping in there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I think what 18-year-old knows really what they're supposed to have. That's our job, is to develop student learning outcomes for working with business and industry and government. And we build these outcomes, including diversity, because you know, one of the top 3 things every company says in America they want are individuals who understand how to live and work with folks who don't look and speak and think just like they do. So if we're not asking them to develop skills in the area of diversity, we're not preparing them for the 21st century.
I agree that the purpose should be much larger than simply training engineers who go out in the field and facilitating oil drilling technology. No, that is a broader purpose. We are universities, and in the sense of that word, we are universal purveyor of knowledge and creator of new knowledge. So yes, I wholeheartedly agree with both you, Sandra, and Amy.
Sure. So let me pose a second question to Sandra. And Sandra, we have had a conversation about it some time back. How do we means US higher education industry, is going to cope up with COVID and also digitalization, you know, which are, you know, the platforms which are coming, you know, and, you know, we have already seen what has happened to MBA schools in most of the part of the country, you know. And go ahead, please.
Well, I think we've got some competing objectives when it comes to international education. And many of us had to switch to digital. And while that does not provide a student with the kind of person-to-person contact and working in a country where you're learning a language at a deeper level and you're learning the values of that country at a deeper level, and the things that Melissa very articulately indicated, that these exchange programs help to facilitate deep understanding and hopefully peace and cooperation between countries. But the fact of the matter is, you know, the other side of this is the business side of it, and online learning is going to allow at least some kind of contact for some students who can never afford to come to another country to learn. And at least they have an opportunity to find a way to make a small entree into international mobility by learning online. Now, I know that international parents have, in surveys, indicated that they have deep distrust of the impact of online learning. There's a lot of us who would speak from a pedagogical view about whether students can master online unless they have some kind of mastery of self-awareness of how they learn. But nonetheless, I think that the technologies you're mentioning, Ani, are going to provide yet another opportunity for another layer of students to have some kind of contact with classrooms in another country. And I don't want to dismiss that as not having value, because I think it may.
Right. Okay, so that takes me
yeah.
to John. Sorry,
Before
I
you
have
go
some
on,
questions here.
Before you go on, Annie, on the question of the future of digital education remote, I turn to Amy. I know it's not necessarily your bailiwick, but I know you know a lot about it. We were one of the first to provide a MOOCs-based global degree, a master's, an MS degree in computer, which has made various headlines. and has attracted people from all over the world on an entirely or quasi-entirely remote basis. Can you say a few words about it? Because I think it's an important case in point.
Yeah, I mean, the large online masters, which the first one was in computer science, there are others now, including in analytics, which may sound like computer science to some of us, but is not. It is an interdisciplinary program, but those programs really showed, I mean, those programs were developed from the outset as being fully online. And that requires an enormous commitment of resources, particularly time, right, to design it that way. The pivots that had to happen in COVID, certainly the things we learned in doing that were really important, because any notions that we might have had around how easy it would be, we knew it wasn't easy by the time COVID hit. And that meant one of the things we did was we had a team on campus that launched a remote teaching academy for all instructors. And they actually just won a staff award for their work, because it was a heavy, heavy lift, and that they've offered many of these sessions to really help everyone adapt, because you don't just get like this in front of a camera and give a lecture that you would have given, and then that's not effective. So when people are finding it not effective online, sometimes, maybe even often, it's because the instructors are trying to do the same thing online that they would have done in person. And it requires a lot more intentionality and a lot more time to develop to see those things. You also find that there are some classes that just lend themselves, some topics, some kinds of activities that lend themselves better to an online environment than others. I mean, so you might imagine it's not an accident that we began with computer science.
Right.
Right? So I think everyone has learned a tremendous amount, and that's part of what we have to keep are the positive lessons of that as we go forward.
Sure, thank you. So I have a question now. I'm going to read it, and I'm sorry, but it looks like Zun Zin, okay? International students may be one of the channels for knowledge transfer. Do you think that international students will share knowledge from home country or what they have learned with host country, institutions, communities, or companies? If so, what kind of knowledge will they share? Is this knowledge useful for the host country?
Oh, it's the whole foundation of exchange of ideas, right? People sharing what their own experiences and are, what kind of knowledge they have is really useful because it helps develop empathy. And it also brings in, they can have some really different ideas about application of things they're learning in class, about approach to problem solving, even about how to work together. So absolutely, a lot of the work that's done around internationalizing classes, right? Not taking people abroad, there are all different ways, but thinking about turning a class, bringing in international perspectives, the people doing that work do it with an eye towards leveraging the knowledge and experience of the very people in the classroom. And they may be F1 international students, but they may also be first generation immigrants or permanent residents or people who have 3 passports, right? I mean, they're all different. There's so much diversity in so many US classrooms now that we can draw on to really enrich the learning that happens in many of our classes. And we should. It's really important that we do that.
Thank you, Amy. So with this, I invite my colleague, Jim Hoadley from Georgia Tech Cyber. He has some questions. Jim?
So the issue of virtual study abroad, we've moved into a lot of that with the COVID pandemic, but it solves a lot of other problems that we can see rising in the near future. It's cheaper, the environmental impact of it is lower. What do we do to update our in-person study abroad and exchange programs to compete with this? Because I agree that there is value in it, but how do we, it's always a matter of balancing. Students are always choosing to balance. How do we help push them towards an in-person study abroad program versus something virtual?
I am actually very excited about virtual programming and the leaps and bounds that the field of education abroad has experienced over the past year. It's one of the silver linings of the pandemic, if you will. And I think it's really important that it's not seen as an either or. We have long struggled with how do you prolong the learning? How do you extend the benefits of a semester or a shorter term abroad? And I think virtual has a role to play in that. Whether it's using virtual programming to introduce students to their host families or their host, their peer students before they go, helping to reduce culture shock. But also helping those students who might be on the fence, who say, well, I've got a lot going on campus this semester and I don't really have time to go. If you can get them to form real relationships with people in other countries, all of a sudden that ignites curiosity. And I have a friend in Brazil or China or wherever, and I'm more curious about my friend's life and how they study and how they think and how they live. So I think that that's one really positive thing. I think the other thing is coming back, right? So most campuses have some type of reentry programming. In my experience, it's really tough to get students to participate in reentry programs. Once they're back on campus, they're eager to tell their story. They have new ideas, they have new things that they want to do, but they're also focused on the semester ahead. So I think extending those relationships and learning objectives through virtual programming is an exciting thing that we might do. And I'll call myself an optimistic realist. There are students who, for whatever reason, are not going to be able to go abroad, whether they can't or they won't. And I think virtual programming is a really valuable tool to internationalize the college experience for those students as well.
I think Melissa did a great job, very articulate about, I think, the benefit of using this new technology that we're all using, new being a relative term. But it seems to me prior to this, it was international pen pals. You would have a seventh grade class who was writing letters to people in another country, and it spurs curiosity. I think this medium spurs curiosity and it demystifies. If you studied abroad as a student, as I did, what you found out is it's so easy to do. I mean, there are hoops you have to jump through and there are forms you have to fill out, but it's really pretty easy once you get somewhere that they're going to support you and help you and connect you. But a lot of people don't know that. And so this demystifies it a little bit and creates relationships, which is what I think pen pals did and what I think this medium will do.
Sandra, I strongly believe that internationalization of life on campus, however, whichever dimension you wish to look at, depends on campus leaders from the top down. As a campus president, how do you encourage and reward, perhaps, the professors and administrators who are promoters of the internationalization process? Can this be acknowledged and taken into account in the PNT and other processes of academic life?
It certainly can. We've really not had to incentivize it much on this campus. It's part of our strategic plan. So every year as a program has to respond to how they have contributed to the strategic plan, is reported out. And, we have a wonderful office of international study who helps our faculty who may have never traveled abroad themselves understand how they can contribute to this. And so I do think this is a role for leadership as well, to articulate how this is part of our vision, articulate how it works into our mission, even think about and talk about how it can be used as an identifier for this institution. So we're part of the comprehensive sector, which is the largest sector of higher education in America. And so we have to differentiate ourselves. And we talk a lot, even from my office and my chair, about differentiation and how having a truly international campus helps to differentiate ourselves and therefore help us market even to American students.
I'm very tempted to pose a challenge to Melissa, who has really issued quite a few challenges to us in going over the Kim report and the other report. You will, of course, be familiar with the Erasmus program of the European Union, out of which our friends, the Brits, have pulled out, rather noisily, might I add. Do you think the time will come when the United States of America will have an Erasmus program? Like? Melissa?
I sure hope so. I think that, I said it earlier, we need a national strategy. We need to invest in education abroad to make sure that our students are developing the skills and mindsets that make them competitive. And if we leave that up to individual schools, as we've done until now, or maybe a few progressive thinkers who, are developing regional plans or state level plans, it just doesn't have the full impact that a national strategy does. And if you look at Canada and Australia, Sandra mentioned the number of international students studying in Australia. That's because they had a national strategy. And Japan also is really making a push to internationalize their campuses. So yeah, do I think it's going to happen? I'm not sure. Do we need it? Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would just like to say one other thing that, Jim, you mentioned when talking about the virtual programming, we just published guidelines on advancing the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals through education abroad, which is a very hot topic in the field. And people in my world are talking about the trade-offs between climate change and the impact on the environment. So I think that's an important document, and it's an important topic, which we're probably not going to have time to get to today, but it is something that people need to know, that education abroad professionals are thinking long and hard about that.
Right.
It would be of very keen interest to Amy, who is co-teaching a class on UN SDGs. Correct, Amy? I know you can't say very much, we're at the end, but.
I am, but yeah, I'm co-teaching a class this semester about advancing the UN Sustainable Development Goals through a global community of practice that's in its pilot phase. And one of the things related to the comment earlier about students connecting with students and kind of modernizing the pen pal experience is one of the things we've seen is that the students want ways to connect with students around the globe, and it doesn't have to be on a specific team project that we have faculty who are doing. We've had students from the pilot universities and the pilot project attend our class, including this morning at 8. And they love to like sit in on class and contribute to discussions and go into breakout rooms. And then what they want is a way to stay in touch with each other easily. So, something other than pen pals, but modern. So that's something I think for us all to think about, the easy ways to link them up and make it possible to them, possible for them to stay in contact easily.
Thank you. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, John. We are about 1 minute away from 5, so I would like to close. Before I close, I want to thank Sandra, Melissa, and Amy, and John and Jim for helping us to put together this event. I think this is a series of the first one we have started this year, so you may hear from us or Jim and John about the second version of this event in the coming months. I would like to share something else with you and the people in the audience. We, as I mentioned earlier in the beginning of our session, that we have been working with Georgia Tech Cyber in putting innovative programs, and our next program is on global trends in digital infrastructure. And that's why, Sandra, I asked you that question. If we would send you this flyer, please help us to join. We have excellent 9-10 speakers, including from Google and Equinix, etc. And of course, Dr. Richard DeMillo from Georgia Tech is our keynote speaker. I want to thank all our partners who have helped us to put together this event. State of Georgia, Forward Foresight, Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, University of South Carolina, Beaufort, Next Generation, Connex, USIBRC, and Marshall Automation. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending. And with this, I would like to close this session.